My father texted me 4 words while I stood alone at gate 22 with 2 suitcases and nowhere to sleep that night. Walk home. You're grown. He had canceled my flight ticket, the one he promised to pay for, the one that was supposed to take me back to my own apartment 3 states away. I stood there under the fluorescent airport lights, my hands shaking, my chest burning with a kind of humiliation I had never felt before. Then I looked at the family group chat and saw why. My younger brother had just been handed the deed to a house. My house, the one I had been saving toward, the one my parents had promised me for years, the one I had put my own money into as a down payment. I did not cry at that gate. I smiled. I typed back 3 words that would end up changing everything. You sure, Dad? He had no idea what was coming. Stick around because by the end of this story, my father was the one calling me, standing outside a courthouse, begging me to stop. If you love stories about quiet people who get pushed too far and then rise up smarter than anyone expected, hit that subscribe button right now, because this one is going to feel so good by the time we're done. Let's go back to where it all started. My name is Claire Whitfield, and for 26 years, I was the good daughter. I want you to understand that phrase because it matters for everything that happens later. The good daughter is the one who never causes trouble. The good daughter is the one who gets decent grades, goes to a state school on a partial scholarship, gets a real job, pays her own bills, and never asks her parents for anything more than she absolutely has to. The good daughter is also, and this is the part nobody warns you about, the one everyone assumes will be fine no matter what happens to her, because she's responsible, because she can handle it. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, in a beige split-level house with a maple tree in the front yard that my dad planted the year I was born. My father, Gary Whitfield, worked at a regional trucking company for almost 30 years, first as a driver, then eventually as a dispatch supervisor. My mother, Denise, did the books for a local dental office and ran our household like a small, tightly managed business. And then there was my younger brother, Tyler. Tyler is 3 years younger than me, and from the time he could walk, he was treated like the sun that the rest of our family orbited around. I don't say that with bitterness, or at least I try not to. I say it because it's just the truth, and understanding that truth is the only way the rest of this story makes any sense. Tyler was charming. He was funny at dinner parties, good at sports, the kind of kid teachers described as a lot of potential, even when his report card said otherwise. I was the kid whose report card was full of A's and whose teachers said, "Claire's such a pleasure, so easy to have in class." Easy. That word followed me my whole childhood. Easy meant nobody had to worry about me. Easy meant nobody had to check in. Easy meant that when there was a limited amount of attention, money, or patience in our house, it flowed toward Tyler, because Tyler needed it, and I apparently did not. I worked through high school at a grocery store to save for a car. Tyler got a car for his 16th birthday, a used Honda Civic that my parents financed, because, and I quote my mother directly here, "He needs the independence to build confidence." I never said anything. That was my role in the family, the one who didn't say anything. I got into a decent university on a partial academic scholarship, and I worked 2 part-time jobs through all 4 years to cover the rest, because my parents told me clearly, calmly, without any apparent guilt, that they had already put money aside for Tyler's education, and there wasn't much left over for mine. "You're smart, Claire," my dad told me once. "You'll figure it out. Tyler needs more help." I graduated with a degree in accounting and finance, no debt because I'd worked so hard to avoid it, and a job offer at a solid mid-sized firm in Cleveland. I was proud of myself. I remember calling my parents the day I got that job offer, genuinely excited, wanting them to be proud too. My mother's first question was, "Does this mean you can help out with Tyler's car payment? He's a little behind." Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Does this mean you can help out with Tyler's car payment? I want you to sit with that for a second, because that phone call, more than almost anything else, planted the first seed of something in me. Not anger yet. Just a quiet, cold little thought in the back of my mind that said, they will never see you the way they see him. I moved to Cleveland for my job. I built a life there. I made friends. I dated a little. I eventually settled into a small one-bedroom apartment that I loved because it was entirely, completely mine. Every year I drove back home for holidays. Every year I brought gifts, helped clean up after big family dinners, listened to my mother complain about her sister, listened to my father complain about his knees. And every single year, I watched Tyler receive more attention, more money, more second chances. Tyler dropped out of community college twice. Both times, my parents paid off whatever fees or fines he owed and told him it was fine, he'd figure out his path eventually. Tyler got fired from 3 different jobs in 5 years. Once for showing up late repeatedly, once for what his manager called attitude issues, and once under circumstances nobody in the family would fully explain to me. Each time, my parents covered his rent until he found something new. I never asked them for $1. Not once in my adult life. I want to be very clear about that because it becomes important later. I paid for my own education, my own car, my own apartment, my own everything. And yet, somehow, in the story, my parents told themselves and told other people I was still just doing fine, while Tyler was the one who needed support. Here's where things started to shift, the part where the tension really begins to build. About 4 years ago, my parents mentioned, almost casually over a Sunday dinner, that they were thinking about eventually downsizing. My father was getting close to retirement. The big house with the maple tree out front was more than they needed, and they'd been talking about moving into something smaller, maybe a condo closer to my mother's sister in Florida. "What's going to happen to the house?" I asked, more out of curiosity than anything. My father smiled at me, actually smiled, and said something that I held on to for years afterward like a promise carved in stone. "We were thinking you should have it, Claire. You've always been responsible. You'd take care of it." I remember feeling something loosen in my chest, some old tension I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Finally, some acknowledgement. Finally, some recognition that all those years of being easy, of being responsible, of never asking for anything actually meant something. Over the next few years, that idea solidified into something that felt like an actual plan, at least to me. My parents talked about it at Thanksgiving. They talked about it at my mother's 60th birthday party, in front of extended family. My father raising a glass and saying, "And someday, this one's going to take over the old house, keep it in the family." I started making decisions around that promise. I want you to understand how deeply I built my life around those words. I started saving aggressively, putting away money specifically earmarked for eventually buying out my parents' equity in the house, because even though they'd talked about giving it to me, I always intended to pay them something fair for it because that's who I am. I even had a conversation with my father about it directly, about 18 months before everything fell apart. We were sitting on the back porch, just the two of us, and I asked him plainly, "Dad, if I'm going to plan my life around eventually moving back and taking the house, I need to know this is actually happening. Not just talk." He looked me right in the eye and said, "Claire, it's happening. You've earned it. You're the one who's always shown up." I believed him. I believed him so completely that I started looking at job openings back in the Columbus area, closer to home, because it made sense to be near the house I was going to inherit and eventually live in. I even put down a small deposit, using my own savings toward some renovation planning because my parents had mentioned the house needed a new roof and updated plumbing, and I told them I'd start contributing toward that now, as a show of good faith, since I was going to be the one living there eventually anyway. Looking back, I know exactly how naive that sounds. But you have to understand, this wasn't some fantasy I built in my head out of nothing. This was a promise, made repeatedly, in front of witnesses, by my own father over the course of years. Meanwhile, Tyler was living a very different life. He'd moved back in with our parents at 27 after his third job loss, and instead of that being treated as a concerning pattern, it became normalized as Tyler's just going through a rough patch. He started dating a woman named Ashley, and within about 8 months they were engaged, and suddenly there was a wedding to plan, and suddenly my parents were talking about helping the kids get started in a way that made my stomach twist. Every time I heard it, I told myself it was fine. I told myself Tyler getting help with a wedding was different from Tyler getting an entire house. I told myself the plan for the house was still intact because my father had told me directly to my face that it was happening. Now let's get to the moment that changed everything, the lowest point of this whole story. It was supposed to be a normal weekend trip home. My father's 65th birthday was coming up, and I'd booked a flight to fly home for the celebration. A flight that my father had actually insisted on paying for as a gift, since I'd been working brutal hours at my firm that quarter, and money was a little tight with everything I'd been putting toward the house renovation fund. "Don't worry about the ticket," he'd told me over the phone. "Let me get this one. You do so much for this family." I flew home. The birthday dinner was warm, actually, in a strange way, looking back. Tyler and Ashley were there, glowing with wedding excitement. My mother had made my father's favorite pot roast. There was a moment, a genuinely sweet moment, where my father stood up with a glass of wine and thanked his family for everything. And I remember feeling, for the first time in a long time, like maybe things really were shifting in the right direction. I flew back to the airport 2 days later for my return flight to Cleveland, the flight my father had paid for as a gift. I checked in online that morning. No issues. I got a ride to the airport from my mother, who hugged me goodbye and told me to drive safe. Once I landed, completely normal, completely warm. I got through security, grabbed a coffee, and sat down at my gate to wait for boarding, and then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. I opened it expecting maybe a safe flight message, something small and sweet. Instead, it said this, and I'm quoting it exactly because I have never forgotten a single word. "Hey Claire, we had to use that ticket money for something else. Family emergency. You're a smart girl. You'll figure out a way home. Love you." I stared at the screen for a long moment, genuinely confused, thinking maybe I was misreading it. Called him immediately. He didn't pick up. I texted back, asking what emergency, asking if everyone was okay, genuinely panicked, thinking something terrible had happened to my mother or a relative. 15 minutes later, he texted back 4 words. That I will remember until the day I die. "Walk home." "You're grown." I sat there in that airport chair, my boarding pass no longer valid on the app, refreshing to show "canceled," my chest tight with a kind of shock that felt almost physical, like someone had reached into my ribs and squeezed. I called my mother. She picked up, sounding oddly cheerful, background noise like she was somewhere busy, maybe a store. "Mom, Dad canceled my flight. What emergency happened? Is everyone okay?" There was a pause. Then she said, in the most casual voice imaginable, "Oh, honey, it's not that kind of emergency. We just needed the money for something for your brother. You have a good job, you can book yourself a new flight, right?" I asked what it was for, and this is the moment, the exact moment, that the entire trajectory of my life shifted. My mother said, Well, since you're going to find out anyway, we decided to help Tyler and Ashley get into a starter home before the wedding. Interest rates are only going up, honey, and they needed the down payment fast. We used the money we'd set aside, including what we were going to put toward fixing up the old house for you eventually. We'll figure that out later, I asked. Very quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Which house did you help them buy? And she said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Well, ours, sweetie. We're just going to formally transfer the house to Tyler now instead of waiting. It makes more sense with the wedding coming up. He needs the stability. You're already settled in Cleveland anyway. You don't really need it the way he does. I don't think I said anything for almost 30 seconds. I just sat there in that plastic airport chair, phone pressed to my ear, watching families reunite at nearby gates, watching a little kid run into his father's arms, and I felt something inside me go completely, totally silent. Not sad exactly. Past sad. Something colder than that. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at nothing, and then I opened the family group chat, the one with me, my parents, Tyler, and Ashley, and I saw it. A photo Tyler had posted 20 minutes earlier, him and Ashley standing in front of our childhood home, holding up a manila folder, huge grins on their faces with the caption, "Officially homeowners." Thanks, Mom and Dad, for making our dream come true. 47 likes. Comments from aunts, uncles, family friends, all celebrating. Not one word about me. Not one word about the fact that I was, at that exact moment, stranded at an airport 4 hours from my apartment, with a canceled ticket that my own father had paid for as a gift, only to yank it away the moment it became inconvenient. That was my lowest point. Sitting alone at gate 22, watching my entire family celebrate the theft of something I'd been promised. For years, something I'd already started financially preparing for, something that had shaped real decisions in my real life. And underneath all of it, the quiet, humiliating knowledge that if I hadn't happened to see that group chat, I might never have even known the real reason. I would have just thought it was some vague emergency. They weren't even trying to hide it from me anymore. That was the part that hurt worst. They didn't think I was worth hiding it from. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, completely still, feeling that specific kind of grief that doesn't come from someone dying, but from finally, fully understanding your place in a family you'd spent your whole life trying to earn a place in. And then something strange happened. The grief started to burn off like fog under morning sun, and underneath it was something clearer, sharper, and a lot more useful. I picked up my phone and I texted my father back. 3 words. "You sure, Dad?" He responded almost instantly, clearly, not reading the tone at all. "Yep, figure it out. Love you." I put my phone away, walked to a different airline's counter, and bought myself a one-way ticket home, in full, no help from anyone, no complaints, no drama. And on that flight, somewhere over Pennsylvania, I started planning. Let me pause here and say something directly to you, because I know some of you are already feeling that anger building up, and I want you to hold on to it, because it's about to be very, very useful. If you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the one who never got the same grace, the same money, the same benefit of the doubt, I want you to know I see you, and I want you to hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next is exactly the kind of quiet, smart justice you deserve to watch unfold. Okay, let's get into it. The first thing I did, once I landed back in Cleveland, was not confront anyone. This is important because I know a lot of people in my position would have exploded, called everyone screaming, posted something dramatic online, and honestly, for about an hour on that flight, I fantasized about doing exactly that. But somewhere over Pennsylvania, a colder, clearer part of my brain took over. The part that had spent 6 years working in finance, reading contracts, understanding exactly how families and money and property actually work on paper, regardless of what gets said out loud at birthday dinners. I realized something important. My parents had made verbal promises to me for years in front of witnesses about that house. Verbal promises are almost worthless in a legal sense, but they're not nothing, especially when there's a pattern of financial reliance built around them. More importantly, though, I remembered something specific. About 14 months earlier, when the renovation planning had started, my father had asked me to help cover the cost of a new roof for the house, since I was going to be the one benefiting from it eventually. I'd agreed, and I'd sent that money directly to the roofing contractor, not to my parents, over $11,000, along with several thousand more toward plumbing updates. I had records of every single payment, invoices with my name on them. Bank transfers with clear memos like roof repair, Whitfield House, and plumbing upgrade, Elm Street property. I also remembered something else, something I hadn't thought much about at the time, but that suddenly felt enormously significant. About 6 months earlier, my father, in a moment of trying to be organized about his eventual retirement, had asked me, as the accountant in the family, to help him draft an informal letter of intent regarding the house, something he said he wanted on paper for the lawyer eventually, specifying that the property would transfer to me upon his and my mother's move to Florida, in exchange for the amount I'd already been contributing and would continue to contribute toward upkeep and eventual buyout. I had drafted that letter myself on my own laptop and emailed it to him for his records. He'd replied with one line, "Perfect, this is exactly right, saving this." That email existed. That letter existed. And now, that house was being transferred to someone else entirely, without a single conversation with me about the money I'd already put into it. I didn't want to destroy my family. I want to be honest about that, because I know some of you watching are hoping for something explosive and dramatic, and while there is drama coming, my actual goal, sitting in my apartment that first night back in Cleveland, staring at my laptop, was much simpler than revenge. For revenge's sake, I wanted my money back. I wanted the truth to be visible, out loud, to everyone who'd liked that celebratory photo. And I wanted, more than anything, for my parents to finally actually have to face what they'd done instead of getting to smooth it over the way they always had before. So I made a plan, and it had 3 parts. Part 1 was documentation. I spent that entire first week gathering everything, every bank transfer to the roofing contractor and plumber, all with clear memos. The email exchange with my father about the letter of intent, including his explicit written confirmation. Screenshots of years of text messages where the house had been discussed as my eventual property, including one particularly damning one from just 4 months earlier where my father had texted, "Once we move to Florida next year, the house is yours. Just keep covering the upkeep like you've been doing. That's more than fair." I also pulled together records of every holiday, every family event where the house had been discussed openly, cross-referencing them with photos posted on social media by various family members that had captions referencing Claire's future house as something of a running family joke, which suddenly felt a lot less like a joke and a lot more like corroborating evidence. I want to pause and say something important here, because I know some viewers might wonder why I didn't just call my dad, scream at him, demand an explanation. I actually did try that briefly about 3 days after landing. I called him, calm on the surface, and asked directly if we could talk about the money I'd contributed to the house. His response, and I remember, this clearly was, "Claire, don't be like this. Your brother needed it more. You're doing fine. We'll figure something out eventually. Don't make this into a bigger thing than it is." Don't make this into a bigger thing than it is. $11,000 for a roof, several thousand more for plumbing, years of promises, a written letter of intent, all dismissed with the same casual tone he'd use if I'd complained about a parking ticket. That phone call told me everything I needed to know about whether an honest conversation was ever going to resolve this. It wasn't. So I moved to part 2 of my plan, which was consulting an actual attorney, not to sue my parents dramatically, but to understand exactly what my legal options were regarding the money. I found a real estate and family law attorney in Columbus, a woman named Patricia Oho, who specialized in exactly this kind of situation, family property disputes involving informal agreements and financial contributions. I sat in her office and laid out everything. The letter of intent, the bank records, the text messages. She actually leaned back in her chair at one point and said, "You have more documentation for this than most people have for formal business disputes. This is very promising." Here's what she explained to me, in plain terms. The house itself, since it had been formally transferred as a gift to my brother by my parents, who legally owned it outright, was going to be very difficult to reverse. Parents generally have the legal right to give their own property to whichever child they choose, no matter what they'd previously promised verbally. That part stung, but I'd expected it, and honestly, by that point, I didn't even want the house anymore. Something about it felt tainted now, wrapped up in years of being taken for granted. But the money. The money was a completely different story. The $11,000 for the roof, the several thousand for plumbing, all of it had been paid directly by me toward a property I did not own under a written, documented understanding, confirmed explicitly by my father in writing, that this contribution was tied to an eventual transfer of that property to me. When that transfer didn't happen and the property instead went to someone else, that created what Patricia called unjust enrichment, meaning my parents, and by extension my brother, had benefited from money I'd contributed under a specific agreement that was never honored. "This is very winnable," she told me. Not just winnable, but honestly, most families settle before it ever needs to go to trial because the documentation embarrasses them into it. Part 3 of my plan was the part that actually surprised me the most in how it unfolded, and it's the part I think a lot of you are going to enjoy. Before filing anything formally, Patricia suggested we send a demand letter first, a formal legal document outlining exactly what had happened, what was owed, and giving my parents 30 days to respond before any lawsuit was filed. "This is standard practice," she explained, professional, unemotional, giving the other party a chance to resolve things without a court case. I agreed, but I also decided on my own to do one more thing alongside it, something Patricia didn't advise against but definitely raised her eyebrows at. I decided the truth needed to be visible to the people who'd celebrated so happily in that group chat. The people who'd liked that photo of Tyler and Ashley with zero idea what had actually happened behind the scenes. Not out of spite, I told myself. Though if I'm being fully honest with you, there was absolutely some satisfaction in it. But mostly because I was tired, so tired of being the invisible one. The one whose sacrifices got quietly absorbed into everyone else's happy endings without a single word of acknowledgement. So on the same day the demand letter was mailed to my parents, I sent one message into that same family group chat. The one with the celebratory photo still pinned near the top. I kept it calm. I kept it factual. I wrote something like this. "Hi everyone. I want to share something for transparency since so many of you celebrated Tyler and Ashley's new home. I'm genuinely happy for them starting their life together. I do want to clarify something though. Over the past year, I personally paid for the roof repair and plumbing updates on that house. Over $14,000 total, based on a written agreement with Dad that the house would eventually transfer to me in exchange for that investment and continued upkeep. That agreement is documented in writing. Since the house has now been given to Tyler instead without any conversation with me, my attorney has sent a formal request for reimbursement of that money. I'm not angry at Tyler or Ashley, and I hope their home brings them a lot of happiness. I just didn't want anyone thinking I hadn't already invested real money and years of trust into that house myself. Wishing everyone well. I hit send, put my phone on silent, and went for a long walk. When I came back 2 hours later, I had 43 notifications. The reaction, honestly, was bigger than I expected. And this is the part where the truth started, rippling outward in ways I hadn't fully planned for, but absolutely was not upset about. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, was the first to respond, and her message was blunt. Wait, what? Denise, is this true? Claire paid for the roof, and you gave the house to Tyler anyway? Then my Uncle Mike chimed in, clearly stunned, asking my father directly if this was accurate. Within an hour, the group chat that had been full of wedding congratulations and housewarming excitement had turned into something closer to a family tribunal with relative after relative asking pointed, uncomfortable questions that my parents had clearly never expected to have to answer in front of an audience. My father tried to respond with something dismissive, something like, "This is a private family matter. Claire shouldn't have put this here." But by then, it was too late, because the questions kept coming, and several relatives, people who genuinely loved me and had quietly noticed the imbalance in how Tyler and I had been treated for years, started saying so, openly, for the first time. My cousin Rebecca wrote something that actually made me cry a little, sitting alone, in my apartment. She wrote, "I've watched this happen for 20 years and never said anything because it wasn't my place. But Claire has never asked this family for a single thing and has given everything. This is genuinely messed up, and I'm glad she's finally saying something." Tyler, to his credit, or maybe just to protect his own image, texted me privately that night, seemingly genuinely shaken. "Claire, I swear I didn't know about the roof money. Mom and Dad told me the house was just theirs to give. They never said anything about you paying for repairs or any agreement. I feel sick about this, honestly." I believed him mostly. Tyler had always been careless and self-absorbed, but I didn't think he was cruel enough to knowingly take something he understood belonged to me in some real sense. He'd just never been told the full truth either, because our parents had spent his whole life shielding him from anything uncomfortable, the same way they'd spent my whole life expecting me to absorb discomfort without complaint. Ashley, interestingly, was the one who pushed hardest behind the scenes, according to what Tyler told me later. She apparently told him she didn't feel right living in a house that had this kind of cloud hanging over it, and she was the one who convinced him to actually call me directly instead of just texting. That call happened 3 days later, and it was one of the most honest conversations I'd had with my brother in years. He apologized, genuinely, for the first time I could remember him ever apologizing for anything substantial. He told me he'd talked to Ashley and they'd agreed that regardless of what our parents decided to do about the demand letter, he personally wanted to pay me back the roof and plumbing money himself, out of what would have been their wedding fund, because it felt wrong to build a marriage on a foundation, literally and figuratively, that had cost me so much. I told him he didn't have to do that this wasn't between him and me. He said, and I actually wrote this down afterward because it meant so much to me, "Claire, I've spent my whole life letting you be the background character in this family so I could be the main one. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I saw that message you sent. I'm sorry. Let me fix this part at least." We ended up compromising. He and Ashley contributed about half of what I was owed, directly, quietly, as a gesture that had nothing to do with the legal process. And my parents, Facing mounting pressure from the extended family and the very real threat of a lawsuit that Patricia assured me would be embarrassing and difficult for them to win, settled the remaining balance within the 30-day window, wiring me the rest, along with a stiff, formal, clearly lawyer-reviewed message that barely resembled an apology. But here's the moment that really mattered. The actual climax of this whole story. About 6 weeks after that airport text, my father called me directly for the first time since everything had unfolded. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice sounded different, smaller somehow. None of the casual, dismissive tone from that walk-home text. He told me he was standing outside the county courthouse, where he'd just come from meeting with his own attorney about the settlement paperwork, and he asked, almost pleading, if we could talk, really talk, not over text. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between us the following weekend. When I saw him sitting there, I almost didn't recognize the man across the table. Gone was the casual confidence, the assumption that I'd just absorb whatever happened and stay quiet like I always had. He looked tired and older, and for the first time in my adult life, genuinely uncertain of himself in front of me. He told me he was ashamed. He told me that, seeing the family's reaction, seeing how many people had quietly noticed the same pattern I'd lived through for years, had forced him to confront something he'd never wanted to look at directly. That he and my mother had always unconsciously treated me as the safe one, the one who didn't need extra care, while pouring everything into Tyler because he seemed, in their minds, more fragile, more in need of rescuing. He said, "We told ourselves we were being fair by giving you less help because you never needed it. We never stopped to think that not needing help and not deserving help are two completely different things." I didn't forgive him completely in that conversation. I want to be honest about that, because I think real healing doesn't happen in one dramatic coffee shop scene, no matter how satisfying that would be for a story. But it was a start. A real, honest start, the first one we'd had in 26 years. Let me tell you where things stand now, about 8 months after that terrible day at the airport. My parents did end up downsizing and moving to Florida, as originally planned, though obviously the house situation looks very different now than what had once been promised to me. Tyler and Ashley live in that house, and honestly, I've made peace with that. It's their home now, and Tyler has been noticeably different since everything happened, more aware, more willing to actually show up for family in ways he never had to before, because for the first time, someone made him see the cost of never having to. I used the money I got back, combined with the substantial savings I'd already built up over years of being the responsible one, and I did something I never thought I'd actually do. I bought my own house, a small 3-bedroom place just outside Cleveland, entirely on my own, with my own name on the deed, no promises from anyone, no strings, no waiting for someone else's permission or approval. The day I got the keys, I sat alone on the empty living room floor and I cried, but not from sadness this time, from something that felt a lot more like relief. My relationship with my parents is still healing, slowly, carefully. We talk now, actually talk. Not the surface-level pleasantries we used to trade at holidays. My mother, in particular, has made real efforts, including one conversation where she admitted, through tears, that she'd spent so many years worried about Tyler that she never stopped to ask if Claire was okay, because she'd assumed wrongly that okay was just who I was permanently without any need for checking. I've learned something important through all of this, something I think a lot of you watching might need to hear too. Being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems, is not the same thing as being invisible, and you should never let anyone in your life treat those two things as interchangeable. Love that has to be earned through endless quiet sacrifice isn't really love. It's just a transaction that only one person is honoring. The moment I stopped absorbing everything silently and started documenting, communicating clearly, and standing firmly behind the truth, everything shifted, not through anger, not through revenge for its own sake, but through simply refusing to disappear anymore. My father texted me, "Walk home, you're grown," that day, meaning to dismiss me, meaning to remind me that I didn't need anyone, that I could handle things alone the way I always had. He was right. About one thing, actually, I could handle it alone. I just decided finally, after 26 years, that handling it alone didn't mean staying silent about it. It meant standing up, speaking clearly, and making sure that this time, the truth walked home with me too. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the one everyone assumed was fine, the one who gave and never got asked what you needed in return, I want you to know that speaking up, calmly and with the truth on your side, is never the wrong choice. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want more real, satisfying stories about quiet people who finally stood up for themselves, make sure you're subscribed because there are so many more coming, and trust me, some of them are even wilder than this one. See you in the next story.